All right. Yeah, we are live. I have no idea whether we have speakers or whether we have listeners or not. Masha controls that. But in any way, this is a Narratorica podcast slash webinar slash video. And we've gathered here today to talk about Bandersnatch with the wonderful Emily Grace Buck of Telltale fame and currently Waylanders and Buckshot Games.
Yeah.
Everything correct. I still remember it correct, right?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. So yeah, I'm really excited to be talking about this today because obviously, if you look at my body of work, there's a lot of interactive narrative in there. I'm a narrative designer first and foremost, even more than I am a writer. And a large portion of that narrative design I've done is on choice-based games, which Bandersnatch fits into that category. And I've played it a number of times. I will probably say some extremely critical things during this podcast, but I just wanted to clarify kind of before we go into it. And I mean, let me know how you feel about this too. I am glad that it exists. I'm really happy that we live in a world where this project got made and was brought to people because it's opened up the ability to have a lot of these kinds of conversations about narrative design and about choice-based work that I'm not sure we would have if Netflix hadn't decided to make a project based off of one of their prestige intellectual properties. So before I get potentially salty, I just wanted to say that I'm glad it exists. I'm glad we have it. And if you haven't played it or watched it, I kind of go back and forth on which word I want to use about it, whether playing or watching. You absolutely should do that, just so you know what they're doing, and also because it, at least in the U.S., it was extremely talked about, even by people I know who would never pick up a game, but do have a Netflix account. So it became part of the cultural zeitgeist really quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about the narrative design of it and what worked, what didn't. I don't know. What are some of your opening thoughts?
Well, my opening thoughts, but yeah, is in the same way that as you are, I'm glad it exists. It misses almost everything for me. I like before we started, I was
Yeah.
thinking like they'll make an opening statement like it's a narrative of the room, but the
Mhm.
room at least like knew where it was going, even though that goal was delirious and
Yeah.
completely like it had Tommy Wiseau at least, and he had passion. You can't deny that, even
Mhm.
though like almost everything is can only be explained by they were vampires. But
Yeah.
it's as a conversation starter, it's a wonderful thing, and also it's easy to pick up and to understand
Yeah.
it. But in
Yeah.
the zeitgeist and in the podcast that I've been listening, specifically like Wisecrack and I'll Sit Down, that have picked the philosophical part, which we might get into if we have time. But
Mhm.
it's nobody has discussed it in terms of narrative design, specifically the design of the choices, the design of interactivity, and the story structure, which I think is what it's perfect for, because it's simple, it's easy, and the mistakes more visible than, for example, in a game that is like 10 hours long. Like our medium
Yeah.
isn't well disposed to like dissecting narrative games on account of like you have to play a 10-hour game and like make notes. It's just a load of work.
Yeah.
And
Oh, totally. Sorry, go ahead.
and for Bandersnatch also, it's like it's not bad, but it's also not good. In
Mhm.
terms of like just in general, and in terms of critique, like I'm pretty sure that given that you mostly worked with choice-based games, and like this is like this has been your bread and butter for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You will have more critique than me, but uh, we will try I will try to like sway it from the narrative design to like the decisions that have like, for example, the production has made or something like that, so that we can get like a full picture, because like those decisions do
Mhm.
not exist in the vacuum, of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. Like the choices are intrinsically tied to the rest of the production of the piece. I was just going to say, so first of all, for people listening, if my voice sounds a little scratchy, I was at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, here in San Francisco all week long. And I have a little bit of a cough. I caught some con crud, so I'm going to try to move mic away from my face if I need to cough, but if it's super annoying, I apologize. I did a lot of talking with people about narrative design all week, so this kind of thing is very on my mind. And one of the things I did was I gave a talk on narrative design and branching narrative basics at one of the side conferences, the Women in Games conference.
Mhm.
And it was really interesting to me. I was saying right before we started recording, I tried to replay part of Bandersnatch this morning, and almost immediately, so many of the choices you are asked to make in that piece of interactive media uh, just break every single one of the conventions I was laying out as the extreme basics of how to do branching. And that's really interesting to me. And I'll get onto that more in a moment. One thing I do want to say to Bandersnatch's credit, they're very honest about how little agency you are going to have over that story. Generally, in choice based games, once again, working at Telltale, we kind of put that boilerplate like your choices matter at the beginning of our games. And then when our certain choices didn't matter, people were understandably frustrated because we had essentially lied to them. Bandersnatch, at least, is very upfront about the fact that your choices do not matter. There is an ideal path through this game. You are not choosing a certain narrative. It's a game or interactive media piece that you are attempting to win and attempting to play into their best version of the narrative. And I think there's a whole slew of problems with a piece like that. And I'm very eager to talk to you about them. But I at least appreciated how quickly they let the player or viewer know that that's what they were interacting with. Just in the first few choices, it's pretty clear that they want you to pick specific things in order to get the best outcome. Where things start to break down for me is how unclear it is which things they want you to pick. Um, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have very much problems with the concept of winning this game
Yeah,
because whatever they think is a win sucks. Not in terms of like narrative, even, but in terms of players' perspective or viewers'
yeah,
perspective. Like even by Black Mirror standards, it's bleak.
yeah,
But okay, let's just dive straight in. A little bit
yeah,
recap for anybody who didn't play Bandersnatch, who didn't watch Bandersnatch. But again, whatever you prefer, we will use them interchangeably, basically.
yeah,
Bandersnatch is a interactive media experience developed by Netflix. It's basically choose your own adventure, but a movie. At some
mhm,
points when you're watching, it's presented with choices, always binary choices. You can do either one thing or another thing. And it follows the story of a game developer in 1980s, a solo game developers, 80s, I think. I think it's 80s Britain.
yeah. At 84, I believe, is when they said it's set. Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. Oh, 80s Britain. It's the developer is trying to adapt choose your own adventure book into a PC, into a game for basically PC. As he's applying to a big company, he decides to do it alone, even though he's offered a team and everything else. And instead of later, after which he, of course, goes into the crunch. He is confronted with the story of a game itself, of the game he's trying to adapt. Basically, the creator went insane because he was confronted with the delusions of whether free will exists or not. And after that, he either confronts it in the same way or he gets out of this loop. It's out of this. Basically, after that, it becomes very wobbly. It's very hard to do the recap after that because like the story just goes haywire and insane depending on the choices that you pick. But
yeah,
essentially, in the end, mostly you realize that free will doesn't exist. And the character Stefan realizes that free will doesn't exist. And I think in most situations, he just dies.
yeah.
And of
That's the
course,
majority of the endings. Yeah,
yeah, in case you didn't realize, we basically will spoil everything
yeah. It's kind of
about
hard
the
to
game.
talk about an experience like this without spoiling what happens in a lot of the branches because
Mhm.
that's so intrinsic to what is designed well and what is designed poorly or in ways that we don't necessarily agree with. Yeah.
Okay, so where would you like to begin from the narrative perspective?
Oh gosh, let's just start at the beginning of the game.
Mhm.
So, the first choice they offer you is, I believe, the cereal choice,
Yes.
which um, I thought I liked that. And I'm saying I
Yeah.
thought I liked it because the first time I played the experience, I picked one of the cereals right off the bat.
Mm,
And what I thought was going to happen happened. So, for context, in what I believe to be well designed choices in interactive media, the game or experience sets up what is going to be a choice. The player understands that that choice is about to pop up. You understand what your options might be. The options similar to what you expect pop up, maybe a
mhm,
little bit different or a little bit surprising. That can be really pleasant. And then you pick one, and something along the lines of what you expected to happen
mhm,
happens. So, in that first choice in Bandersnatch, you're offered one of two different kinds of cereal for breakfast. It's
mhm,
super mundane, but the same kind of choice people make every single day.
mhm.
It lets you set something about your character, and that's quite pleasant generally. You pick a cereal box, and that cereal box is what your dad hands you.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also a good tutorial
Yay.
for the
Yeah,
system.
exactly. However, when I'm saying I thought I liked that choice and then I didn't, um, it, there are choice timers on, I think, all of the options in
Yeah.
Bandersnatch.
Yeah, all of the choices
So
work
you
the
only
same
have,
principle.
yeah, you only have a certain amount of time to make your decision. And if you time out, which I chose to try and do this morning when I was
Mhm.
replaying the first part of it, the dad just hands you one of the boxes of cereal. And I
Mhm.
went back and tried it again to see if he'd hand me the same box every time or if it was randomized. And he handed me the same box every time,
Mhm.
um, which, from a design perspective, we would generally say that then that is the correct path, that the game is encouraging you to go down that path. So even in that very first choice about something completely mundane, the game is saying, no, here is the right answer that we really want you to pick. And I take issue with that.
Yeah, it's weird that they do it for. I don't know if they have the capacity to do the randomized choice. I'm assuming
Yeah.
they can. Like I don't know what how the platform works, but I'm assuming they can do like either true or false on the. It's just binary, so like they can do
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I'm
But
not completely certain. I know that for Bandersnatch, they used extremely similar tech to what Telltale built for their Netflix port of Minecraft Story Mode, but
mhm,
it's not exactly the same. So I admit I'm slightly biased because I know a little bit about how that works. I was not on the Minecraft Netflix project, but also if you're listening and you'd like to see an example of how this kind of interactive media work can be done on Netflix in a way that does respect player choice and actually gives you agency instead of the illusion of free will or the full on rebuttal of free will.
mhm.
Um, Minecraft Story Mode is a good thing to go look at. Try and play it and see how you feel about it, especially in comparison to Bandersnatch.
Yeah, and it should be available in almost every region. It's Netflix
Yeah,
production, so they usually like just spam it everywhere. It is here in Germany, and I think it's the poorest selection Netflix has. And okay, so after the serials, I think there is another choice about music,
yeah,
and but mostly it's just mundane choices all the way up
yeah,
to the one that I have like the almost the most issues with. So
yeah. Same.
when Stefan comes to work, all of the choices they don't matter. They just essentially create the atmosphere, just for everybody listening and watching for the context. But then Stefan, being a developer, he brings it to the developer company. I don't know if
Mhm.
they're a publisher or a developer company that just invests in something. Doesn't matter much, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not
Uh,
really sure.
yeah, but they decide to either publish or to develop that game. Essentially, give him money to make this game. and then there is a choice. They offer him full team, full sound designer. Basically, they offer him like a really sweet deal. Like I would have taken that deal, but
Everyone
when
who works in games would probably have taken that deal. That just doesn't happen to people. It's an
yeah, thing is,
amazing, ridiculously good deal.
initially when I was just playing, I
Ah,
figured, okay, let's just do the boring choice now, and I'll just work alone. And so I just played alone and so on. Just figure I knew that I will be replaying it more than once. So
yeah.
then I just came back and I tried to work in a team, figuring out, oh, team dynamic, everything else, like free will, maybe that will be working
Hmm.
differently. And then the problem with the choice is basically, do you take the money and work with people, or do you take the money and go home and work from home? And if you take the work from home, game continues. If you take the work right now, then the game just tells you it's game over. It was the wrong choice. It tells you it's the wrong choice. It's the wrong branch. One of the
Yep.
characters tells
And a
you that.
character actually breaks the fourth wall
Mm,
and tells you like you did it wrong.
yeah.
It's extraordinary, honestly. Like I could not believe that was happening the first time I played this experience, because the first time I went into looking at Bandersnatch, I hadn't read anything about it yet,
Hmm.
and yeah, I was stunned. I could not believe that was happening. Partially because I mean, it fits the choose your own adventure style, I guess, but it was not telegraphed that that would be the wrong answer.
Hmm.
As a person who works in games, that is absolutely the right answer. Like having a team is totally going to make your project better 99% of the time. Don't be an auteur asshole. Like that's not how it works. And just quite frankly, like it's promoting a really dangerous view of creativity on top of taking away your player agency.
We will talk about the dangerous parts of creativity later, because like that's the whole thing by
Yeah,
itself. But
yeah,
as a choice itself, it cuts out the branch for no reason whatsoever. Essentially,
yeah.
like
Which, like,
arguably, I
thematically, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. I
like
was going to say sorry.
I would just remove that choice and place it somewhere else. Just the same choice where it will make more sense, and where it's like cutting out the branch would just make more sense. Like dealing with the scheduling, for example. Like if you just okay, so how much do you want? Like 3 months or a year to develop this money? How
Yeah.
much do you need? You say 3 months, you crunch to death, you die. If you take a year, then the game proceeds, where it makes more sense, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and kind of going back to what I said about the fact that I often do narrative design talks,
Mhm.
so often games, especially someone's first choice based game, which from what I understand, this was the first choice based project that this team had ever worked on, that these writers had done. So this is a really common pitfall where you make a choice about something, and then there is only one right answer. Whereas in a more elegant design space, if you know there's only one correct way to progress through that section, you make the
Mhm.
choice about something the player can control. Um, an example I use a lot of the time is if your character is walking into a coffee shop and says, "I would like coffee" or "I would like tea,"
Mhm.
and the barista behind the counter goes, "Sorry, we just have coffee if you pick tea." That feels like crap. It's like, why did the game offer me tea
Mhm.
if I can't have it? Whereas if the game had just offered you like how you want your coffee fixed, you could still just get coffee the
Mhm.
way the game wanted you to, and you'd feel good. Like you'd feel like it paid attention to your choices. This makes you feel bad, and it quite intentionally makes you feel bad. I mean, it's paralleling Stefan, the main character,
I think
Stefan, I
it's
don't
Stefan.
remember. Stefan. He has just shown off the first choice in his game that he's trying to get them to publish,
Mhm.
and he only built one of those two branches. So at least thematically, it's staying with what he's doing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it doesn't feel good as a player at
And
all.
actually, with that, there's also the response to that choice. I believe it's meeting with the demon and Colin, who is like sort of he breaks the fourth wall. He is the guru developer.
Yeah.
who also has his own issues. And
Yeah.
that good developer, like when the choice is presented, I believe it's run or attack him or worship him with the demon of free will, and he like immediately just foreshadows that, as in he sort of knows about the timelines and stuff, and so he just
Mhm.
immediately says like worship this demon. In which case, it's kind of
Mhm.
like, yeah, just do what you are told. But then again, if it's supposed to be do what you are told, then what am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Because even the ending that occurs right immediately after the conversation about after you pick the wrong for this game choice, it just says that like the game was just pushed around because of of the different people on the different. It's completely bullshit reason essentially, and I do not
Yeah.
like it. It does not inform me even like I'm working games, so I just know that they're full of shit. But if it's somebody else, then like how what how it doesn't train me in any way to make decisions later. It's just arbitrary. It's unpredictable and unexpected.
Mhm. Yeah, it feels bad. Um, it feels real bad. And then if you make that choice to accept and it tells you it's wrong, they backtrack in the story pretty far and give you a recap of like everything that's happened up until that point. It doesn't just go back to you walking into that office. It
Mhm.
fast forwards through pretty much the entire game up until then. It makes you sit there and watch it over again, which feels like an additional punishment. Frankly, it's like I remember what I just did. I just did this. I just saw this. I don't really need the recap. It's quite intense in a way that I did not personally enjoy.
I have mixed feeling about this feature because there is a nice thing if you interact with Colin quite a bit. Then he starts altering the recaps. There is content that you can't see in any
Mhm.
way other than a recap, which I thought was really
Yeah,
cool. Like he disappears from recaps even though he was there just the last
yeah,
recap, or he just
mhm,
picks in like, yeah, hey, I told you this was the right branch or something like that. Like he's just there and he does things, and it was really cool. It was really a nice way to make recaps don't feel like a punishment.
yeah.
uh,
Colin is actually my favorite part of the whole experience,
yeah,
personally. Yeah.
I think he's also written the best, to be honest. But they just didn't go far enough with that, because their
Mhm.
interaction with this timey wimey timeline, it isn't like very much detailed. While we're here, let's just discuss the story structure in general. Like, as far as I
Sure.
understand, like how you're supposed to win the game, you just run it in like you technically what the whole Netflix program just explains is that you have to collect all of the endings,
Mhm.
basically, which are all bleak. They're just different level of bleak, sort of in the Black Mirror style, I suppose. But and you also, like, to achieve some of them, you have to do like a choice in one playthrough, then it will keep this track in another playthrough,
Yeah.
and all of it rotates around like the different timelines that you exist in, with like the usual like every parallel universe is just a choice, a different choice made. But within that, they don't actually use it a lot. Well, like with the recap stuff that just helps you fast forward to the choice that you have just made, and they like put choices. I would say that they put the choices that you backtrack to like somewhat, I'd say, somewhat well.
Mhm.
They don't force you to replay a lot of the game, because replaying it is a little bit of a chore.
Yeah, they're spaced reasonably, and they know which kinds of choices you want to remake and which ones you don't. Like the breakfast cereal one I was mentioning earlier and the music one after it. Um, that's just flavor. They didn't need
Yeah,
to make you remake it, and they knew that. So that was well done.
yeah.
I grant that.
And one of these things is basically Colin, in the timeline things. Colin, he just exists in recaps, and he just unless you do something, he just tells, "Hey, haven't we met before?" In the scene where you
Mhm,
just meet him. Then you can eat some LSD and smoke some weed with him, and he starts popping up and telling you stuff about timeline, and you can kill him.
mhm.
In which case, he just disappears from timeline. Sorry, not kill him, but make him commit suicide, and he
Yeah.
just disappears from the timeline altogether. And I think these are the exact three interactions that you can do with him.
Mhm.
and he's well aware about this timeline. But the whole game just the story and the game just feel completely disjointed because the gameplay that you're supposed to do just collect all the endings, and the story that is like manipulation of the choice of free will and timeline, just they don't mix whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, frankly, because the real story, at least from how I understood it, that they're getting at is the meta story of you actually playing this experience
Mm,
as opposed to the main character going through his life, which is dissonant. I like to talk a lot about how narrative design, in my opinion, is a lot closer to, in many ways, a user experience role than it even is to a writing role, because you're thinking about how the player is experiencing your story and trying to line that up with the themes of the narrative that they're experiencing. And in Bandersnatch, those two things are not aligned with one another at
mhm.
all. And that I can't tell because it's in the Black Mirror IP if that's intentional and they're trying to make you feel really uncomfortable because Black Mirror tries to make you feel uncomfortable all of the time, or if it's not well designed. There's a lack of intentionality feeling there that I wasn't sure.
Well, Black Mirror by itself is usually like very one note in their episodes. Like they just take leitmotif and they
Yeah,
just hit you on the head with it, and usually they
yeah.
offer no solution or no like optimism or something like that. It's essentially an old man Charlie Brooker yelling at the sky. I'd say,
Yeah,
but in this case, like it feels like it was just amateur design work. Because like Brooker, at least in
yeah.
Black Mirror, they are well written. You can't like deny that. Well, for the most part. But here it's just like the free will concept. If the disjointment of like we are not the player, we are not the Stefan, we are actually the player, we are actually us.
Yeah.
It does happen at some point where you think you're playing as Stefan and everything is fine, but then the disjoint happens when he just realizes that we just become aware of the fact that we exist. But then
Mhm.
again, it isn't played much because at that point I figured, okay, I need to save the guy and get him out of this loop because I would imagine
Yeah.
that would be the goal, or I just need to play with him and like make him realize something, or just to find ways to interact with it. But then
Mhm.
again, also because of the game designed this way, and I suppose it's kind of the point of I have no free will either, except I can make choices.
Mhm.
The ones that it's not like all of those choices eventually backtrack to the right track. Like there is a choice between whether you will take an LSD or not, and if you say no, then Colin will just drop LSD in your cup, which is a nice thing to be honest, because it shows the Colin's character that he will just do it anyway. Although why Colin would do that of all people, but also it's a kind of a shitty choice in the whole presence of Black Mirror in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't love that choice personally, because I felt like the narrative was giving me a chance to opt in or not, and then that consent was like taken advantage of. Um,
Mhm.
I it made me uncomfortable. A number of things about that sequence did. There's also a choice in that sequence of flushing the drugs down the toilet,
Oh,
and
it's a
the
different sequence.
oh right, sorry, it's
Mhm.
the other drugs.
Yeah,
um, but the two things that pop up are like throw them. I don't remember the exact display
flush
text,
them
but
or
it's
take.
basically flush them or throw them away, and they're like the two exact. They both do the exact same thing.
No, I think
Um,
there is you can either take the drugs and then there is an ending, or you can flush them and then the game continues more.
okay, maybe I'm sorry if I remember that incorrectly, but yeah. Anyway, the game does that all over the place though, where it's like things where it seems like you have a choice, and then it says, "No, just kidding, screw you. This is something that needed to happen."
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, once again, I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yeah, correct. If it's, I don't have that much grief with screw you choices if they would be handled, better. Like it's
Yeah.
like if the like the Collins LSD choice. Okay, Colin is a bit of a dickhead. I can understand that.
Mhm.
The choice with whether you work in a team or not. Uh, there is no reason whatsoever for for that ending to happen specifically.
Yeah.
And also with LSD, I can at least understand that. Okay, you spent a lot of time to make this room really trippy. You want people to see it. Okay, fine. But my problem is when they just remove the choice when it's like a clearly wrong choice, not the
Mhm.
illusion of choice, but clearly wrong. Like if you take the again, if you take the pills and you just take the pills, your mental health is suffering. So you take the pills, as the doctor said, and
Mhm.
then the game ends, and it says that the game was boring. Which again, yeah,
Yeah.
please do crunch suffer. But apart from that, it just delivers the ending again for no reason. Just it's basically a game over screen. You died essentially.
Yeah.
The
Which
only
and
time
that
that you
one,
and the only time
yeah.
where you can actually die is when you just jump off the cliff, and then I expect, yeah, they will just tell me that it's a wrong choice and somehow miraculously resurrect me because this is just how the game works apparently.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a bit of a Groundhog Day loop to
Hmm.
it. I was gonna say about the mental health pills too, that like as a person who has depression, what and if I'm going to therapy, for example, my creative work is so much better. It's not boring. Modeling that on a massive platform, that goes beyond uh, for choice-based design into potentially unethical game design, in my opinion. And I find that deeply problematic to put in front of people, especially when you consider who the audience for Black Mirror is. It is a lot of artsy people who
Mhm,
enjoy extremely highbrow entertainment.
mhm.
And this experience just told them that taking your meds is going to make you boring to the point you might as well just stop.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and that's not great.
From that perspective, I think it's good to talk a little bit about media literacy in general, because I think
Yeah.
when they were making Bandersnatch, they were just trying to make it for like the audience that has no idea that games exist, sort of.
Yeah.
And so they model it for both. Like Colin is basically your, 70s, 80s artistic person. He takes all the drugs, he makes all the games, he's famous, he knows
Yeah.
more than you do. A cliche. It's a fun cliche though.
Mhm.
Stefan is a tortured soul, basically, who has he has his issues. He's working alone, and he's basically a hikikomori. Again, also another like stereotype. And then there is the guy who I think is the nicest character, who just gives you money and moreover, allows you to postpone the deadline from today to next Monday, which I'm like,
Mhm.
shit, I had to spend 3 years to just own in my skill of renegotiating deadlines, and he just gets it. But anyway, and it represents this game. It's as a subculture, the gaming industry, in a very stereotypical way. And it brought me to thought that the choices in general, they were designed this way to be sort of the most simplest possible, because there is no need to make them more sophisticated on account the audience will be mostly media illiterate. They would not know what is better, because I've heard it on a bunch of podcasts who don't care whatsoever, and they have been tearing movies to shreds. It's mostly movies podcasts, of course,
Mhm.
and like literally none of them have talked about the choices specifically. They were talking about just the feel and the atmosphere and how this experience just
Mhm.
translates. And it made me feel that basically they just didn't care. Essentially, it
Mhm.
just felt like it was they just filmed the main progress and then just filled the game overs here and there, instead of just
Mhm.
making Russian Doll, which is another Groundhog Day style series, but it's done extremely well, at least in
Mhm.
my opinion. Also, incidentally also features a game developer character who was portrayed much better.
Hmm. Yeah, I really liked Russian Doll. I thought that was excellent, and it did some of the same things as Bandersnatch without being interactive. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which makes me wonder. And I guess this is a question that I asked myself a bunch of times as I was experiencing Bandersnatch. Did it need to be interactive, or was this a gimmick? Like, was this the story that really needed it? Because Black Mirror is an amazing IP for doing an interactive piece. Like, that was a good call, but uh, did this one really earn it? And I I don't know that I can say yes to that personally.
I said they just didn't go in the right direction. Sort of
Yeah.
again, I blame media literacy, and just like by media literacy, I just mean like not for the listeners, in case you think that I'm calling everybody illiterate. By media literacy, I mean just understanding of how the medium works in general and
Yeah,
how do you
totally.
consume it. So it's just you've never played any games. It doesn't make you a bad person. You're just media
Oh,
illiterate.
totally
It's
not.
just
No.
a statement of fact. Yeah.
And I
Uh,
guess part of where I get tripped up with that, so, and I've talked to you about this before. Before my time at Telltale, I worked in serious games. I worked at a company called Cognito, making conversation simulators for educational purposes for people who do not play games. We
mhm,
made games for like doctors on how to have better bedside manner,
mhm,
and for like teenage girls on how to talk to their friends about depression, stuff like that. And we had data,
mhm,
like actual research data, that when you're putting games in front of populations who are less uh, used to playing them,
mhm,
those choices and the impacts of their choices affect them way more than people
mhm,
who are used to playing games. So, actually, if you're creating something for a group that is media illiterate in the sense of they don't play games usually, you have to work at a higher ethical standard
oh yeah.
on your choice based work, not a lower one. Um, Otherwise, you could create real harm because people assume it's something about them, and that's
Mhm,
why it went that way. They don't assume this is just how games work.
mhm.
So I actually would personally say that's a further strike against uh, Bandersnatch in that way, that they should have been more careful instead of less careful because that was their audience.
Yeah.
I wish they had been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they actually made an episode about video games, which I like. I use quite a lot because it's so like a wonderful exercise in foreshadow. I think it's
Mhm.
season two. What's deep dive, flash dive? It's about basically a guy who signs up to be a tester for a game, for a VR, AR style of game, and he dies in it,
Yes.
which is a really cool episode, and it's very well done, and it handles
Mhm.
like the game industry in general very good. But
Yeah.
yeah, not to sound salty, it's just like basically just 15-year-old looking at the game industry and thinking about this is how it works, and seeing our industry right now. There will be people like that, but they will be like in a minority. And again, he will never see, hey, here it is, you showed us two branches, have a game, have all the money, and this will never fucking happen.
Mhm. And if it does happen, take the
take
money.
take the team, take the team.
Take the money, take the team, do the thing. And yeah, I kind of touched on this earlier, but thematically, I also found that really problematic because, like, for example, right now, there are so many people getting an education in video games. Some of you listening right now, that's you. Maybe you're in university programs on top of this. And there are more people coming out of those programs than the game industry can absorb,
Hmm.
which is depressing. Um, and at the same time, many of those programs promote crunch culture, promote tourism, promote going indie immediately. When, if you want to have a fairly stable life and God forbid ever do something like raise a family or own a house, that's really hard. And the fact that this piece of work immediately took I don't know how old the main character is supposed to be, but he reads as like 20.
Hmm.
He's
Yeah, I
young.
would agree.
Took a young man and put him into this position that so many people have as their dream job, especially young men. I mean, there are more people coming up in game design programs who aren't men now, but it is still a lot of dudes. um, Presents them with a choice that would be a lot of people's dream choice, and then punishes you immediately for making what industry wise would actually be the correct call.
Mhm.
It's a little disconcerting.
Yeah, and it also shows a lot of stuff regarding the drugs in general. Like,
Yeah.
I think you can only do it right if you consume a fuckload of drugs, kill,
Hmm.
like, annoy your father and then kill him,
Yep.
and in general alienate everything that is possible until you hear voices that tell you that Netflix is a streaming platform from the future.
Yep. That was amazing when that happened. I
Uh,
actually kind of dug that. It was so bizarre.
Yeah. No, that one I actually like because
Yeah,
this was
I
like
liked it.
this was actual agency done well.
Yeah.
Because like I can do,
Yeah.
although I can show him only two things, even though there are like three, four things that I can collect, I think, and
Yeah.
how it replaces it is another question. But I can just like at that point I thought, okay, I can have a conversation with the guy. I can now
Hmm.
help the guy. Like, yeah, there is no
Hmm.
free will, dude. I'm controlling you. What the fuck do you want to do? Or
Yeah.
something like that. Maybe I can help him develop the game, but
Yeah.
it never happened because the game was just it was way more concerned with making the movie specifically. Otherwise, like I think it just the same topic, the same thing, and it kept it kept bouncing around in my head. I'm just like making it like the same text in the same format, like choose your own adventure or something like that, in which you
Yeah.
collect sort of variables, the information from different timelines to develop this particular game. Like you go into the timeline of this cycle somehow because you take a lot of drugs, for example. But in the end, you have to do a timeline of like you're completely clean, you're clear-minded, but you have all the information from all the timelines. For example, you essentially
Hmm.
just guide this particular, and you as a player talk with this character as in a proper
Hmm.
interaction. Otherwise, it just feels again like you are there's a lot of conversation about games on used to be games as our roller coaster, like when
Hmm.
we just meant thought about like just shooters where you just follow the level, you don't have any choice where you're going, but you have an immense interactivity and playfulness in what you can
Hmm.
do within those frames. Here it provides the framework where we have no playfulness. It is interactive. You can't deny that.
Yeah.
You can interact with it, but there is no play involved. You just follow the lead and in the most boring way, probably.
Yeah.
And like if you pick up, in one podcast, I heard it. I heard Undertale mentioned in the same podcast, and it was like shit. Like Undertale just delivers it so much. Although, like compare, Undertale is actually a good example because it was developed by one person over like what 6 years or something like that.
Yeah. It is a good game though. I love it.
Oh yeah, Undertale is
Yeah.
like cult classic,
Yeah.
and even comparing Bandersnatch to Undertale felt like extremely unfair.
Yeah.
I actually have no idea what to compare Bandersnatch even. Like maybe like yeah, Telltale games, but on account of made mechanic, but it's not what it was going for.
Yeah. It's interesting because they've talked about the fact that they wrote it in Twine. And
Hmm.
I think you can really feel that in how the interactive experience works, both with the way it sets things like variable tracking and how
Hmm.
it jumps around, and then goes back through things. Because, like, for example, Twine, unless you build variables into it, doesn't have an automatic way to check, like, if you've hit certain nodes.
Hmm.
And Bandersnatch kind of feels that way too. Like it's extremely old school text adventure e, and I think that's why we don't have a whole lot of comps for it. Is because the game industry has not, in general, been doing work like that for a really long time. Like
Hmm.
looking at choose your own adventure novels and really early text adventures is the most helpful lens through which to examine Bandersnatch. But then you have to also step back and say, wait, all of the things I'm comparing it to are at least 15 or 20 years old. Like
Hmm.
we've moved so far beyond this specific style of choice-based interactive media that it's almost hard to talk about it.
It kind of feels like there are plenty of sometimes it's some countries, some industries of some countries just fall behind. Like Russia is usually right now I'd say it's like 2 years behind. It used to be like 6 years behind of the whole industry, and you
Mhm.
just sort of jump on a trend that died out in the world, like in gonna use America just as a proxy, like died out in America, for example, like yesterday, but you're like 6 years ago, but you're still trying to do that. It kind of felt
Yeah.
this way, but like in extreme, because it's like Choose Your
Yeah.
Adventures. They did not have like what, like I think it's in the 80s that they have died out with the advent of audiovisual medium proper.
Yeah. And even modern choose your own adventure novels, like you have things like To Be or Not to Be, like the Shakespeare one.
Hmm.
Um, and they have substantially more player agency
Hmm.
than Bandersnatch. So even that section of the industry has moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to like we have to mention that Bandersnatch in general, to produce it is way more expensive. Like to produce all the branches is extremely expensive. You essentially have to
Hmm.
film like 10 or 11 hours, I think, of content, even for
Yes.
what we have seen. So
Hmm.
it's like you basically have to film the entire season of Black Mirror
Yeah.
just for hour and a half experience. So, which again, like makes me more question why they didn't like. It's like in this situation, I would just if there is usually on the projects, if there is a variable that there isn't enough budget for content creation, I would try to reuse the content as many times as possible. And
Yes.
here they have already featured recap, which is basically reusing of all the scenes, a reusing of all the old takes. You don't need to reset up the sound scene. You don't need to reset up the lighting. The actors are
Hmm.
here. Everybody is paid for. Let's do this.
Hmm.
But again, it wasn't used in this format. It might be that I thought that it could be like really cool if you just basically just collected the recap, your ideal recap, and then you just jump around in it, or you like
Hmm.
with the same system. You just after the end of recap, you end up not where you're supposed to be, but at the set at a different point, and you kind of
Hmm.
like play against the game against Charlie Brooker with Stefan specifically,
Yeah.
and
That would be really neat. I would have loved to see that as a feature. That's cool. Now I want to make a game that has that.
this is basically
Bandersnatch 2.
after the release of Bandersnatch, this is all that I've been thinking about in the context of Bandersnatch in general. But that felt like more narrative, like narrative in general. Like you have to have mechanical dictionary, and it's not always like just you
Mhm.
have choices. It's also how you
Yeah.
interact with choices. So if the what how variables are affected, and what is your like, you can have the choices of just okay, I make choices to make my own story. I make
Hmm.
choices to like manage a farm or something like that, which can again be done in the Sims, like in the Telltale system, for example.
Hmm.
With like you make certain choices and certain assets scales up, for example,
Hmm.
and then the variables are tracked. You can also do like you can do a fighting game and this, which they kind of tried, but
Hmm.
that was super weird. And that game just didn't concern with that. It was just like, oh, okay, we're making film with choices, kind of.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it was done. It was done before Netflix, before even Telltale, numerous times. I remember it's like sort of full. I don't remember FMV how it's what's FMV stands for, but not like FMV games, but in general like movie experience where you just skip essentially to the right
Hmm.
conditions. But
Yeah.
it's not very developed. I can give them that, but also like you like you have, Charlie Brooker is used to critique games, I think, like as an author in
Hmm.
general. He had a show. I think he worked a lot with Cara Ellison, narrative
Hmm.
designer, and this felt like just it was completely ignored, every single one of them. Like every single like thing, like what we have developed in narrative design field, like what you have said on this thing, what I'm teaching, was just ignored. It was like it never existed, and this is why like it provides like invokes uh, such strong feelings in developers, because like but you could like you could, and in this
Yeah.
case like you really could. You can do the same thing in text adventure, and then you can do like this script in the form of text adventure essentially in the same twine or ink,
Hmm.
and do it well and use the recap even in ink. Sorry, I get emotional.
No, it's okay. I feel you. And I think that's part of why, like when I was talking about the dissonance between the user experience and the story, I keep wanting to assign some level of intentional nuance and subtlety to
Hmm.
it because I'm like, there has to be something. Like, please tell me someone thought about this. And like you were saying, I don't know that they did. And accepting that when, this came out not too long after Telltale closed and all of us lost our jobs. And I know so many people who are so good at this, who are
Mhm.
still looking for work or who are doing contract work that they have to keep renewing and searching for new things. And I'm like, pick one of them up. Like there are people who are really, really good at this. And they're available. And some of them are not even that expensive. Like let them work on a Netflix project. Let them help you. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think that's where a big part of my frustration with it
Mhm.
happens is that it would have if I mean, I think a lot of the issues in Bandersnatch could have been solved with like a 2-hour consultation with a game narrative designer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just basically pick up the script. Like it's a script doctrine essentially. It's what was
Yeah.
required. Just to sort of like probably as a closing argument, not argument, but a subject. Like the whole concept of
Mhm.
free will. That they like
Yeah.
the whole premise of this game is free will doesn't exist. Basically, whatever you do, it ends up with some turn on this thing, which again, Black Mirror. Like
Mhm.
bleak as hell. There is no way out. Like one of them is just as a recap. One of them you consume a lot of drugs. You develop the game. The daughter of Colin starts developing this game, and you like as a cheeky, you have a choice of like throwing the doing the same choice as you've done for the Stefan. There
Mhm.
is an option where you end up on TV set and you don't understand why you're here. Then there is what I suppose passes as a good ending is when you go back in time and you kill yourself alone with your mom, which is again very Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Even by my standards, it's bleak. But those are all of the choices. These are all just the endings. It's again, it's I wouldn't say they are specifically like done through the choices. So,
Mhm.
do you feel like the lack of free will in general just pops up in the narrative, not in the story by itself, but in the narrative or in the narrative design? And like, how would you do that? How do you approach like showing this theme by mechanics?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, free will doesn't exist is an odd theme for a choice-based game.
And Black Mirror game.
Yeah, I mean, like, just at its core, that seems like an odd thing to try and tackle with
Mhm,
an interactive medium where you're asking people to make decisions. I do think, especially when you're talking about the ending where he goes back and kills his mother, like that got telegraphed really well in the very beginning of the story when he talks about the fact that he found the book in her things.
mhm,
That was cool. That felt once again, obviously bleak and not a happy ending, but there was something very satisfying about seeing that wrapped up, which I appreciated having control over how that happened.
mhm.
Um, but even listen to my words there. I appreciated having control over how that happened, which means I feel like I have free will, um, which plays against that theme.
Mhm,
So yeah, I don't know. I kind of like I was saying at the beginning, they were honest about the fact that you weren't going to have free will a lot of the time from the get go.
mhm,
So that is the overarching theme to me. Once again, as weird as it is,
mhm.
kind of worked, and the narrative design did mostly hit that. I just think that's not a good choice to work off of in general.
Yeah, but in terms of free will, oh my god, Stanley's Parable deals
Yeah.
a little bit with the free will, where narrator just
Mhm.
tells you which is the correct way.
Yeah.
Stuff in a similar fashion of like the illusion of choice. There is like no choice for you specifically. This is how the game is designed. Although they offer like a
Mhm.
variety of branches, all of them
Yeah.
talking about different things. And with the illusion of choice, like there is a lot of conversation about how much of a choice of an agency we should give to the players, as in we control the choice as narrative
Yeah.
designers. But like if the game a game about free will just immediately tells you there is no free will and you will not have
Yeah.
free will, none of your choices matter, then it's basically like a movie like saying right off the bat, this is the movie about love or something like
Mhm.
that. it's sort of like a cop out. Like there must be a more subtle way to do that. Maybe not like in a Stanley Parable way, but in terms of like how do you approach the design of the game or something like that, wherein just the circumstances just eventually determine your path.
Gotcha. Yeah, I
Uh,
understand. So for me, when you're working with a theme in a, especially a choice-based interactive experience of any kind, um, part of what makes that theme really resonate, in my opinion, is allowing the player, viewer, whatever interactor to comment or make choices on various takes on the theme and
mhm,
explore different ways that it can work. And that's kind of what I meant when I said a moment ago, like, you don't have free will is not a great theme. Free will could be a good theme.
mhm,
But the piece of media in this case has taken a stance on it, and everything plays into that one stance. There's not as much room to explore. Even most of the characters have that same stance, in my opinion.
mhm,
Um, and that is a much less interesting experience for me than one where the piece of media is putting forward a question and I get to answer it myself, or at least feel like it has helped me answer it. But it's very Black Mirror-y, kind of like you were saying earlier, to hit you over the head with a mallet with their point, and that's what they do here.
yeah.
So it's on IP.
But when you're doing a movie, like there is no free will. Is a like it's an easy thing to do because like there's no free will. Capiche, sort of the
Yeah.
interaction between the medium and the consumer. But in video games, it's like the theme usually has to be described like there is no free will. What do you do? And you're
Hmm.
forced to like interact or do shit within this free will, which is why
Yeah.
I thought that I would be able to save Stefan somehow or like
Hmm.
manipulate Colin, and you get like different takes. And it is what usually like video games in general like do. They have different takes. Again, like even if
Yeah.
you take like Dragon Age or style games, Bladel Gate, they usually like you can talk with people and take their get their take on the situation from which like you can
Hmm.
make probably the last choice. Even the games that we have like Deus Ex, Human Revolution, the first one, the first rebooted one.
Hmm.
It was criticized for their one choice in the end, where you just pick what ending you want. However, they had the whole theme again of transhumanism and so on. But they
Hmm.
have allowed you to discover this theme and all these takes during the course of the game, which I think
Yeah.
if you yeah, it might be like there is no free will. It's just you're not allowed to explore it, and it feels like it's the filmmaker's problem. You have the theme. You are super like in the filmmaker. You just sell the theme. In a video game, you have to deal with the player maybe not disagreeing with you, and you have to provide arguments, not necessarily give the right choice, which I think is the
Hmm.
ethical problem. Like every time that video game provides like this is the clear solution, this is the clear outcome, I believe it's a little bit wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to do it that I think can still feel good. Like, especially if it's like a quiz portion of a game or something like that, where you've been learning skills and now there is a clear way to answer this riddle or beat this boss based on how you've learned throughout the rest of the experience. But in my opinion, Black Mirror doesn't have that. There isn't a whole lot of consistency to learning how to navigate the choices. I don't feel like I got smarter and got rewarded for it, which is often how you build your core loop of any system in a game.
Yeah, and you kind of didn't learn
Yeah.
anything from the story perspective.
Excuse me. No. Yeah.
Like
I
even
don't
within
feel like I
the
got better at playing it.
oh yeah. Well, I didn't know how to play it. Nobody explained to me
Yeah.
that. I thought that you just are supposed to like change the. There is one change when you're like the government conspiracy branch, which is kind of
Mhm.
cleverly foreshadowed, kind of. But then, like, oh, there is a choice. Well, the choice substitutes from packs to pack, I think. Like it's just one letter,
Mhm.
but it's like you can either summon the demon or you can discover the conspiracy. Which again, whether it's right or not, and again, this take on free will is also extremely bleak. Basically, government determines your fate,
Mhm.
which is again bleak as hell. But
Yeah.
I thought that this might be the like I have to like find bits and bobs. There is a point where somebody tells me the phone number, and then I input the phone number, which is why I know that they
Mhm.
allow to make at least 10 buttons on screen.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of like they didn't focus on the right design, and that design just fell flat on its face. It's mostly gimmick. It's just a movie with a gimmick. What I
Mhm.
think it
Yeah.
is in the end.
Yeah, and like I'm guessing we should probably start to wrap up.
Yep.
I I said at the beginning of this, I'm glad Bandersnatch exists.
Hmm.
That said, I really wish that as the first prestige project Netflix put out there with choices, it had been something less bleak, something less negative, something that celebrated finally giving standard television viewers control over a story instead of something saying you don't actually have any control and you never will. Um,
Hmm.
I'm eager to see what they do next and where their projects go. I'm excited to hopefully see projects that respect player agency
Hmm.
and use that tool in a way that uplifts people instead of kind of pushing them down.
Hmm.
Um, but I have a lot of mixed feelings about the fact that this was the first one. That this is what people are going to think of now. That the next time they play a game like this on Netflix, they're going to be like, none of my choices matter. I don't have free will. There are things I can do wrong. Um, it set that tone. And if I had any say in how that tone was set, I would have swung as far in the other direction as humanly possible.
Hmm. Yeah, probably pick the less complicated theme, and I would actually like pick another. Actually, what kind of movie you think, like existing movie, just to make it more fun, just as a final, would you think would be a good interactive experience, like to give it more interactive
Ooh,
choices?
ooh. I mean, there are so many. Working at Telltale, this is the kind of thing we talked about all the time. Um,
Whatever pops in your head first, I suppose.
my first answer was going to be the X Files, actually.
Oh.
Um, yeah, which also could potentially be bleak, but has two very obvious characters with opposite commentary on things at all times. I mean, that's a big part of what makes Mulder and Scully work. And
Hmm.
it's a world where you can could uncover things and feel really smart about it, or choose to let things slide under the rug and be comfortable with that decision. You know what I mean? There's a lot of room for different takes in that IP. And I
Hmm.
think that's really helpful when it comes to choice based games. So, something like that. Why? What would you like to see?
I would pick some romantic comedy. I would pick
Ooh, nice.
like the easiest, like either romantic comedy or just a dumb action movie. Like Hardcore Henry, for example, which again also already
Hmm.
is a first-person shooter from the point of
Yeah.
view, but more like a simple story to just iron out the mechanics, iron out how it works, how the players react to that. I think the problem here is just it's so like Bandersnatch was overly ambitious, the story and the theme is incredibly complicated. So it has to be like
Hmm.
an experienced crew who does that. And if you take like Hardcore Henry, where it's basically your choices depend on how spectacularly you enter this building, or in a romantic comedy,
Hmm.
like how would you approach these romantic situations? Although rom-com can be like
Hmm.
dangerously, toxic in many ways, of course.
But you could design
Uh,
one that wasn't. That's always
true, true.
available. Yeah.
That is always available. That doesn't necessarily what is going to happen. You think that
Yeah.
Charlie Brooker is a wonderful writer, but well, not wonderful. He's a good writer with a very bleak attitude. For the reason, like just the word "wonderful" just not applied to. It's too cheerful for Charlie
Yeah.
Brooker.
Now I want
Uh,
to see a Charlie Brooker written rom-com. That's all I can think about. That would be
I'm pretty.
incredible. I'd love to. Has he ever written a rom-com? Does this exist?
I don't. San Junipero, I think, is the closest thing.
Okay, yeah.
From again from the Black Mirror, probably the most cheerful episode
Mhm.
of the whole, and actually the best one.
Yeah, I love that one. That's
Yeah.
my personal favorite. But I like the happier ones. I liked that. I liked the USS McAllister a lot.
hmm Oh yeah, actually, it's like
Yeah.
well, he does a lot about video games, and weirdly, this one, the video game episode, he kind of dropped the ball. Like he has
Yeah.
McAllister, he has the nosedive again, whatever it's called, something with a
Hmm.
dive,
I think
and
it's
generally,
Nosedive. I think that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and McAllister is like wonderfully done.
Yeah.
It again, it's the similar like McAllister as a video game would be wonderful.
Hmm.
And again, there's also a omnipotent game developer and a player in the same point that just takes agency from every NPC. Ah. Anyway, I think we should start wrapping up. Just in case Masha is here, she is just invisible moderator. So if you have any questions, type them into the chat. Masha will channel them. Masha, what? Every time I speak English, I start pronouncing it with English accent
It's
for whatever
okay.
reason. It it hurts me. Every time I say Kuleshov effect instead of Kuleshov effect, it makes me die inside and burn my passport a little because I know how to pronounce them. I don't have any excuse. I suppose there are no questions, so yeah, we'll just wrap up. I think it's a good place to end. Well, I'm pretty sure that we
Hmm.
can just dissect it more and more, but in terms of format, I think that's a good place just to end. And it's kind of like again, it's kind of experimental thing. We basically just I figured that just as a background, instead of like in case like your listeners want to see it more in the future. Although again, for everything else other than Bandersnatch, it would be quite difficult because it's like 40 hours, and you're basically asking us to work the whole week. But we just figured on one of the webinars on the courses, we just touched on Bandersnatch, and it was like 5 minute detour
Hmm.
immediately, completely uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And we figured it might be interesting point of view on like a subject that is already developed and give it some critique in terms of narrative design, which is as nebulous as heck by itself, and might be interesting to just at least try to do. Again, talking about narrative design in general is about as complicated as figuring out what Bandersnatch is about. Sort of, it's the same nebulous principle.
Yeah. We're
So
finally starting to have words, but it's hard.
yeah, and there are plenty of stuff like in popping up in terms of narrative design. I'm working on rewriting the course that I've been doing, that you've been on, in more narrative design direction, and you are giving talks and you're teaching narrative design. So hopefully there will be more and more. And I hope your talk that you have mentioned in the beginning will be on video somewhere.
I it was. They definitely streamed it on Twitch. I don't know if they recorded the stream, but I want to talk to them about that because if they do, I'd love to share it.
hmm Yeah, I hope it doesn't do the GDC thing that they always do, where the best one are behind the paywall.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
always tricky.
yeah. So anyway, thank you very much for coming, Emily. Thank you very much for talking about Bandersnatch. And I suppose Masha usually does this thing. Um, I suppose that's it. And Masha will get us off air any moment